Even though he was rich, this man was miserable. You could tell from in the past that he'd had to do work. Now his hair was black and spiky because he had worked so long in the mines, and he could never have his hair so that it would lie down over his ears. But his eyes were dark blue and evil, and he looked around this enormous mansion. He'd had to walk from his own home, a richer home than this. He'd had to walk through the misty forest on this crisp, fresh spring morning. He'd gone without his breakfast. Some people said that it was spooky and haunted, but he wasn't frightened. He'd been here many times, and now, as the owner had entered into this enormous mansion, he was hiding. He was hiding. This was not his home, and the only place that he could find to hide was by the side of the gleaming bronze-green bins. There was a stench in the air of old food, and it made his stomach rumble all the more and remind him that he hadn't had his breakfast. His mouth was downturned, almost like an upside-down smile, but he could feel the coldness of the bin through his ragged shirt. He was hoping that the owner of this house would not spot him or hear his stomach as it rumbled. He looked. He'd reached for an ornament. He'd seen that there were round purple grapes inside of it. When he was a miner, he'd never tasted fruit, no apples, no oranges. And now this man who had so much was looking at the ornaments on the top of the mantel shelf, above the roaring fire. Even though it was a spring morning, he made sure that the coal would burn. He reached down. He picked up a newspaper. It rattled and creaked. And this thief, for that's what he was, who'd come into this enormous mansion, could smell the newsprint. He could never read himself, for he was just a miner who had earned his way, and now he had money and strong hands to show for it. But he wanted something that was his, something that had been his. He could see it, a trophy, glittering and gleaming and glistening, and he was hoping that he could take it. His hands were strong, but his fingers were nimble. He reached slowly and carefully towards it. As the owner of this house had his back towards him, he was reading that newspaper so strongly that he wouldn't have noticed if a horse and carriage had run right through the middle of the house. And now the trophy was his. Although he couldn't read it, he knew that it bore his name for the best workman who'd ever worked in the mines. And the mine owner had stolen it back. As the mine owner looked about his enormous mansion, he was sad. His heart was like a lump of coal in his chest as he saw this thing that he had stolen was gone. They never met in the town, the mine owner and the miner. One would smile to look at the glittering, gleaming gold. The other would smile to himself. But the owner knew how it had been, for there were long footprints, muddy footprints, left in the hall of his mansion. There was no doubt about it, this girl was clever. Her friends, and she had lots of friends, would always say that she was brainy. She wore clean but ripped clothes on her back. She was poor, and she would pull her fingers through her straight, long hair. Now she was down by the side of the silky, sunny, sandy seaside, making an enormous sandcastle. She made them because she was good at it, but she was making it now because it was fun. She loved to make them. They were so tall she would have to stand on a brown, smooth wooden chair. She could feel that this was the last day of spring, and the hot summer sun on this morning was beating down on her hands and face. She was a poor girl, but she loved to run her thick and broad hands through her long straight hair. Her eyes were always bright, green as grass, and she was happy. She was good at making things, and you wouldn't think so when you looked at her skinny hands and arms. But this rainbow-coloured dress upon her back was ripped and torn, and one time it had been a very rich dress. When she kneeled down by the soft sandy seaside, the pleats would show all of the colours of the rainbow. All she could think about was eating a margarita pizza. She loved them when they were thin and fresh, hot and crisp. But because she was so poor, all she would get would be the pizzas that were thrown down onto the ground by all of the people who would pass and look at her as she stood in her flip-flops by the side of the salty sea. She was a clever girl. Her friends would all say to her that she was brainy. You could tell by the thin red smile on her face and her bright green eyes that she was a friendly girl, a good girl. She loved her long straight hair, and it would blow in the mornings, and on this, the last day of spring and the first of summer, it was hot. It was a hot morning. She loved being down by the side of the silky, sunny, sandy seaside. She would loved to have had a better dress, but she made sure she kept it clean and would put her hands straight over the ripped portions of it. Now, she worked very hard down by the side of the salty sea. She would make enormous sand castles. Today she was making them because she felt as if she needed some fun in her life. She was good at making sand castles. They were so big that she had to stand on a brown, smooth wooden chair and use her broad hands that were getting dirty with the sand to make all of the beautiful details of this. She was happy, good at making things with her hands, and opposite where she was, there was the best shop in town. It was always clean. It made the finest margarita pizzas that you've ever seen, thin, fresh, hot and crisp, but you could never afford it. But the people inside of the shop were glad that she was making the sandcastles. People would stop and look at what she'd done and cross the road and eat inside of it. The head chef waved for her to come in. He was pleased that so many people had come and eaten the pizza once they'd smelled them that he'd given her a shining red apple. And as she went outside, she polished it on the side of a dress that held every single colour of the rainbow. And she was just about to eat it when a greedy bird came from out of the sky, snatched it from her hands, and took one bite and dropped it in the sea. And she watched her apple floating on the calm, salty sea. By the side of the sea, there was a teenager, mean and unhappy. He had so much money that he had a golden ball that he could play with, and he threw it high in the air, and down it rolled way past her sandcastle and found itself lodged in a gloomy sea cave. He said to the girl, "Go and get my golden ball." His voice scratched at her ears. She didn't like his voice, but there was no way that she would go. The girl said, "No, I will not. I'll get wet, and I'm going to do what I like to do. I think it's fun to make sandcastles by the side of the sea." The boy went home and said to his mother and father that someone had snatched it. Someone had stolen it. He did not say that he'd been careless with it. When the sea had gone right out, the girl, with her flip-flops upon her feet, had gone into the cave and found the ball, and she was just about to come back and give it to him when he looked and said, "There's the girl! She stole it! She took it! She took it from me!" The girl was strong, clever, brainy, and stood up for herself. "No, I did not. I went inside of there with the smell of the sea, and the seaweed was there, and I brought it back to you." The boy, his cheeks blushed red. "We're going to give you a reward." And they gave her a beautiful necklace, a necklace that was made out of silver and gold. She would have liked to have kept it around her neck, but as she made pizzas by the side of the sea, she would take one of the golden hearts from off the necklace and use it to buy pizzas, not just for herself, but for all of her friends. She liked the memory of the necklace. And when she was a woman, there was none of it left. But people would come and look at the sandcastles that she would make, and she would earn enough money for herself and her friends, and make sandcastles down by the side of the silky, sunny, sandy seaside, and she would smile. There was a boy. He was tall and very good. He loved to come all of the way down on holiday to the side of the salty seaside. He would make beautiful sandcastles. Now, he didn't live by the side of the sea, but he loved to make sandcastles. He was very good at it. But what he didn't know was the seashells that he was using, well, they were spiky. And some people would say that they were quite dangerous. But he would pick them up and put them on the side of the beautiful sandcastle. Now, down by the side of the sea there was a train, a beautiful train. It was blue, it was red, and the wheels would go round, and you could see the yellow metal on the side of the train. And along it would go, and it would make that noise. And inside of the train there was a man, the train driver. He would wave to everyone, and everyone would wave back. But when he looked and saw that sandcastle down by the side of the salty seaside with the spiky seashells, he nearly had to stop that train where it was. He looked, and he could see the seashells, and the seashells were spiky and dangerous. When he got to the station, he jumped out of the train, and he ran as fast as he could. Can you all pretend to run with me? And he ran as fast as he could, and he went right down to the side of the salty seaside and saw the spiky seashells on the side of the sandcastle. He looked and said, "Oh, you've got to be very careful. I know that you're big and good and tall, but somebody might slip and fall on those." He looked. The two of them took all of the seashells from off the side of it, and the time went past. And on this hot spring day, I'll tell you something. He said, "You know, you should be able to think about how you do things. When I was your age, I would keep my eyes open, and I would look all around. And, you know, I've got something that you might like. I've got a toy that was given to me when I was little." The boy, who was good and tall, looked and said, "Have you still got some of your toys?" And the train driver said, "Yes." Can you say it like that with me? And he said, "Yes. And I'll let you have it if you make sure you keep your eyes open and look all around and never use those spiky seashells to make your sandcastle down by the side of the salty sea." He said, "Thank you very much." He loved it. He was never any good at telling the time, but it was made out of plastic and had a special kind of a noise, a whir and a click that you could hear. And he loved it. And when that boy grew older, he would go to the side of the salty seaside, and he would be there with his own children, and they would have buckets and spades, and they would make beautiful sandcastles down by the side of the salty seaside, but they never put spiky seashells on the side. And they would sit and they would eat, and their father would tell them of a train driver that helped him. And they would say, "You mean that old toy that you've got? That old plastic toy that looks like an owl that helps us to tell the time? Was that given to you when you were a boy?" And he said, "Yes." This girl was looking out with a broad smile on her face. She was always happy. She would see it in her eyes. She looked around because she liked to play tricks on people. She was a nasty girl with long curly hair. Now she was smiling and wondering what she was going to do. She could see that in a shop there was an old toy. A toy that looked like a machine that you could use by the side of the seaside. She looked at it, and then she saw someone she knew from school. He was looking at it. "I'd really like to buy that old toy for my dad. He loves old things like this, and he's always telling me how you could take some money and put it inside and press the button and the levers would go, and he would love to have it as a birthday present." She said, "Your dad would like to have that, would he? Oh, well, I don't think you'll have enough money, will you?" The boy said, "No, I don't." She had lots of money. When she went down into the middle of the town, she decided that she would have a drink of the most expensive lemonade that she could find. And she spent lots of money. and inside of a leather jacket, with her thin hands and fingers, she could feel some money. She didn't want this old toy, but she knew that the boy she knew from school would love to buy it for his dad. She smiled. Show me that smile. But it was bigger than that. A huge smile. A huge smile that stretched from one ear to the other ear. I'm going to buy it. I'm going to keep it for myself. And she bought it. She tucked it underneath her arm and took it home. And that night, as she sat down, she ate her favourite meal of boiled chicken. She looked. The next day at school, she could see the boy was crying. A small silvery tear was running down his cheek. Can you do that with me? Make a tear roll down. A small silvery tear was running down his cheek. She said, "What's the matter? What's the matter with you?" He said, "I was going to buy that. I'd saved up all of my money and I couldn't." "Well, I've got it now, and you can't have it." The boy thought to himself, "Well, I'll just have to get something else for my father." And he walked across a bridge, right over the top of the bridge, and in the distance he could hear some music playing. He found on the other side of the bridge there were some musicians who could pick up their guitars and play some music. He said, "That's the best music I've ever heard in all of my life. Would you come and play for my father on his birthday party?" "Of course we will. We'd love to play. We'd love to play music for you and for your dad, and we won't charge you a penny." At the birthday party, everyone danced and everyone sang. But he didn't invite the girl, the one who'd been so nasty, the one who'd taken it just because she could afford it. She'd hear the music, and as she sat with the toy, it broke. She was sad, but everyone else laughed and danced and joked. And the next time she wanted to do something nasty, she had to think, do I want to sit by myself while everyone else hears the music? And you'll see her with a smile on her face. A smile because she's not going to do nasty things anymore. Touch one ear. She was a girl who was kind and helpful. She had a lot of money. She was rich. But all she would ever think about was how she could help people who were poorer than her. Now she was sitting in a boat. She had a smile on her face. She was very happy. She loved this white metal boat. It was hers. But what she didn't like was this dirty lake with lily pads. She lived beside the lake and would often go fishing. And she'd heard people say, if you go fishing at night, this is when you catch the best fish. On a windy winter's night time, she was sitting there rocking in her boat. The wind was blowing through her long straight hair. She could feel how lovely and soft it was on her skin. As she looked out with her big blue eyes, she couldn't stop herself from smiling. She pushed her fingers against the smooth rain jacket she had on her back, and she felt in the pocket. She was hoping that she would be able to find a banana or an apple. She loved eating healthily. All through that day she'd played in the old park, but now the cold was starting to scratch at her stretchy leggings. She stomped her Ugg boots to try and keep her feet warm. This girl was kind and helpful. You could see it in her big blue eyes. The wind was blowing through her long, straight, lovely, soft hair, and she loved to be here on this lake. The lake had got dirtier and dirtier, and nobody knew why. At the side of the lake there were lily pads, there were insects, there were frogs. But on this cold, windy winter's night time, she was sitting in the boat, happy. She knew she could swim anywhere and everywhere, but she'd never had to swim in this lake. She knew that it was so cold that it would take her breath away, and maybe she wouldn't be able to swim here. But this white metal boat was hers. She loved it. She loved to go fishing. She'd heard someone say to her that if you go fishing by the dark of night, that's when you catch the best fish. She'd been quite sensible. She'd put on her rain jacket. It was very long, and the cuffs were turned round, so just the tips of her fingers were sticking out. But she hadn't caught anything. In the middle of the lake, there was a wide tree, a big tree, and leaves were starting to hang down and falling on her head. She was far away from the side of the shore, and she wondered if this was the best place to be. She wasn't that warmly dressed. Her stretchy leggings were starting to make her legs feel cold. They weren't keeping the winter away from her. But as she pulled in the fishing line, she saw at the bottom of it that there was a necklace that was covered all over with dark green emeralds. I'll tell you this, she smiled by the light of the moon on the lake, and she looked. She stamped her Ugg boots inside of the boat to try and warm herself. She thought, I could buy a lot of bananas with this, yellow bananas that would feed me and make me nice and warm. She remembered that she'd been playing in the park, but she wondered who this could belong to. There was a movement in the boat. The boat rocked this way and that, and as she looked into the water, she saw two ferocious eyes. Who has taken my necklace? She was frightened now. There were all sorts of stories of things that lived underneath the water, of how there'd been a rich queen who had stolen a necklace, who'd been made to live at the bottom of the lake. Who has taken my necklace? She was very frightened now. She said, I didn't take it. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to take it. And she wished she could have reached inside of a handbag to phone for her mother or father to come and rescue her. She'd heard the stories of how anyone who fell into the water, the flesh would be taken from their skin and they would be nothing but a bag of bones at the bottom of the lake. I didn't take it. And then this queen with her hair all sleek, her skin all spotted and wrinkled from living under the water for so long, said, Well, do you want my necklace? The girl looked and thought. She was rich. She could have been generous and given it to anyone else. She said, I'll take the necklace if I can give it to everybody. No, you've got to decide whether you want it for yourself or not. If I can't share this necklace, then I don't want it. The queen who lived under the water screamed. She screamed because if the girl had taken the necklace, she would be forced to live under the water. When the girl went home, she sat herself down by the side of the fire, and she told her mother and father about what she'd seen from under the water. And her mother and father said, That's a good story. Why don't you just sit down with us and have some bananas and eat with us? But the girl knew it was true, and she never ever went to the side of the lake. Her old white metal boat went rusty. She never went into the water again, for she had seen the witch queen of the lake.